Australia has a dark, hidden history, one that doesn't often make the tourist brochures. It's a story of power, money, and violence, all kept within the family. For decades, a complex and brutal criminal underworld has been shaped not by lone wolves, but by powerful, interwoven family networks. These dynasties have controlled vast empires built on fear, loyalty, and bloodshed, their influence stretching from the docks of Melbourne to the suburbs of Sydney and beyond. They are the architects of a criminal landscape that is uniquely Australian, a world where the lines between family and business are not just blurred, they're non-existent. Unlike the sprawling syndicates of the US or the rigid hierarchies of the Italian mafia back in the old country, Australia's organised crime has always been intensely personal. It's a world built on blood ties, deep-seated ethnic connections, and a code of silence enforced by extreme violence. Loyalty isn't just demanded, it's inherited. These are not just criminal organizations. They are clans, tribes bound together against the outside world, against law enforcement, and often against each other. The feuds are legendary, the betrayals are personal, and the consequences are almost always fatal. This is organized crime at its most raw and intimate. In this investigation, we're going behind the headlines and into the shadows. We will pull back the curtain on Australia's most notorious crime families. We'll examine their origins, trace their rise from obscurity to infamy, and dissect the criminal activities that made them rich and powerful. We'll explore the bloody feuds that defined an era and ultimately led to their downfall, and we'll assess the lasting influence they've had on our country. This is the story of Australia's hidden empire, a legacy written in blood and built on crime. It's an organization so secretive, for years many in law enforcement doubted its very existence in Australia. They call themselves the Onorata Società, the Honored Society. We know them as the Ndrangheta, the Calabrian Mafia. Their roots in Australia stretch back to the post-war immigration boom, arriving not as gangsters, but as farmers and labourers. They settled in quiet towns like Griffith in New South Wales and market garden communities on the fringes of Melbourne, maintaining the traditions of their homeland, including its most dangerous one. Their initial criminal enterprises were small-scale, almost provincial. Extortion, standover tactics, and illegal gambling, all kept within their own communities. But their true genius, their path to immense power, lay in their patience and their secrecy. They operated in plain sight. Their members often respected local businessmen, greengrocers, and community leaders. This deep cover allowed them to build a national network, cell by cell, family by family, all connected by blood and marriage back to the small villages of Calabria in southern Italy. The 'Ndrangheta's structure is its greatest strength. It's not a pyramid like the Sicilian mafia, it's horizontal. It's a web of autonomous clans, or ndrine, each loyal to its own family boss but all part of the larger collective. This decentralized model makes it incredibly difficult for police to dismantle. Taking out one cell, or even one boss, doesn't cripple the organization. The web remains intact, the business simply rerouted. It's a structure built for resilience, for survival, and it has allowed them to thrive for generations. Their big break came with the narcotics trade. Leveraging their international connections, the Calabrian Mafia became the primary importers of cocaine and ecstasy into Australia. They controlled the supply chain from the source right down to the street. They were meticulous, sophisticated, and utterly ruthless. The disappearance and murder of anti-drugs campaigner Donald Mackay in Griffith in 1977 was a chilling message to the rest of Australia. The Ndrangheta was here, and they would eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Mackay's murder exposed the organisation to the public, leading to the Woodward Royal Commission, which confirmed what many had feared. A powerful secret criminal society was deeply embedded in the country. But even this intense scrutiny couldn't stop them. They simply went deeper underground, refining their methods. They became experts in money laundering, washing their drug profits through legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, and wholesale markets. They bought property, they invested, they became part of the establishment. Today, the Ndrangheta is considered by law enforcement to be the most powerful and enduring organised crime threat in Australia. Their influence is pervasive. Their wealth is astronomical, and their operations are more sophisticated than ever. They have infiltrated legitimate supply chains, corrupted officials, and continue to import drugs on an industrial scale. They are no longer just greengrocers and farmers with a dark secret. They are a silent, multi-billion-dollar corporation of crime. While other gangs have risen and fallen in spectacular public fashion, the Ndrangheta endures. They avoid the headlines, they settle their disputes internally, and they focus on the business of crime. Their power doesn't come from flashy cars or public displays of violence. It comes from their silence, their discipline, and the unbreakable bonds of family. They are the silent hand that has shaped Australia's underworld for over half a century, and their grip shows no sign of weakening. Melbourne in the 1970s and 80s was their playground. Lygon Street, the heart of the city's Italian district, wasn't just famous for pasta and coffee. It was the headquarters of one of Australia's most charismatic and feared criminal gangs, the Carlton Crew. This wasn't a family in the traditional blood sense, but a brotherhood forged in the pubs, cafes, and illegal casinos of inner-city Melbourne. They were sharp dressers, smooth talkers, and old-school gangsters who lived by a code. At the heart of the crew were figures who would become legends of the underworld. Alphonse Gangitano, the Black Prince of Lygon Street, was the flamboyant, violent face of the group. Mick Gatto was the tough, pragmatic enforcer and industrial mediator. And presiding over them all was the grandfatherly figure of Graham the Munster Kinniburgh, a seasoned criminal with a sharp mind and connections that ran deep throughout the city's corrupt networks. Together, they were a formidable force. Their criminal rackets were diverse and lucrative. They controlled illegal gambling, extorted businesses, and were heavily involved in drug distribution, particularly amphetamines. But their real power came from their influence on the waterfront and in the construction industry. Through standover tactics and Mick Gatto's role as an industrial mediator, they controlled who worked, what got built, and who got paid. They were the unofficial law in a world where union power and criminal muscle were often indistinguishable. The Carlton Crew projected an image of glamour and respectability. They were seen at the trendiest restaurants, the biggest sporting events, and rubbed shoulders with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. They presented themselves as legitimate businessmen, community figures who just happened to operate by their own set of rules. This public persona masked the brutal reality of their business, a reality that was never far from the surface and was enforced with fists and, when necessary, with guns. But the bonds of this brotherhood were fragile, strained by ego, greed, and paranoia. The turning point came on January 16, 1998. Alphonse Gangitano, the crew's volatile frontman, was shot dead in his Templestowe home. While associate Jason Moran was a key suspect, the murder was officially unsolved. Gangitano's death created a power vacuum, shattering the crew's unity and setting the stage for a conflict that would drench Melbourne in blood. The death of Gangitano marked the beginning of the end for the old-school Carlton Crew. The code of honor was broken. The internal disputes that were once settled behind closed doors were now being settled with bullets in public streets. A new, more ruthless generation of criminals, led by the ambitious Carl Williams, saw an opportunity to challenge the old guard. The era of the smooth-talking gangster was over. The Carlton Crew's story is a classic tale of criminal hubris. They believed they were untouchable, that their power and influence made them immune to the violence they so readily employed. Their role in sparking the Melbourne Gangland War would see most of their key members, including Graham Kinniburgh, end up dead. They were the kings of Lygon Street, but their reign was built on a foundation of violence that would ultimately consume them all. If the Carlton Crew were the old guard, the Moran family were the established, hard-nosed professionals of Melbourne's drug trade. For decades, they were one of the most powerful and feared names in the Australian underworld. Led by the patriarch, Lewis Moran, and his two sons, Mark and Jason, along with his stepson Mark, the family ran a sprawling criminal enterprise built almost exclusively on the manufacture and distribution of amphetamines and other synthetic drugs. They were pioneers in a dark industry. Lewis Moran was the brains. A career criminal with a quiet, calculating demeanor, He managed the business from the background, laundering the immense profits and maintaining the family's network. His sons were the muscle and the face of the operation. Jason Moran, in particular, was notoriously violent and unpredictable, a man who had inherited his father's criminal ambition, but none of his restraint. He was a key player in the Carlton crew before branching out to solidify his own family's dominance. The Morans ran their empire with an iron fist. They controlled the supply of precursor chemicals, the cooks who manufactured the drugs, and the network of dealers who sold them on the street. Their name alone was enough to inspire fear. They were known for their short tempers and their capacity for extreme violence. Crossing the Morans wasn't just a bad business decision. It was often a death sentence. Their influence was so significant that they effectively controlled a large portion of Melbourne's drug market. Their dominance, however, made them a target. A young, ambitious drug dealer named Carl Williams began to resent the tax the Morans demanded for allowing him to operate. The tension simmered for years, but it exploded into open warfare on June 21, 2000. Mark Moran, Lewis's stepson, was shot dead outside his home. The prime suspect was Carl Williams. This wasn't just a murder. It was a declaration of war against the most powerful crime family in the city. The feud escalated into one of the most brutal conflicts in Australian criminal history. Jason Moran, enraged by his half-brother's murder, sought revenge. But Carl Williams was always one step ahead. On June 21, 2003, exactly 3 years after his brother's death, Jason Moran and a family associate, Pasquale Barbaro, were gunned down in a van while watching a children's football clinic in Essendon. The brazen public nature of the execution sent shockwaves through the nation. The Moran dynasty was crumbling. With both his sons dead, the aging patriarch Lewis Moran was exposed and vulnerable. He knew he was a marked man. On March 31, 2004, while having a drink in his favorite haunt, the Brunswick Club, 2 masked gunmen walked in and shot him dead. The hit was, once again, orchestrated by Carl Williams. The execution of the family patriarch was the final, brutal act in the war. In less than 4 years, Carl Williams had systematically exterminated the male line of the Moran crime family. The only one left was matriarch Judy Moran, who herself would later be convicted and jailed for organizing the murder of her brother-in-law. The collapse of the Moran family was swift, total, and incredibly violent. It serves as a stark reminder that in the underworld, no dynasty is too powerful to fall, and a legacy built on violence will almost certainly end the same way. He didn't look like a traditional crime boss. With his baby face and chubby frame, Carl Williams looked more like a suburban dad than a man who would orchestrate one of the bloodiest crime sprees in Australian history. But beneath that unassuming exterior was a burning ambition and a capacity for ruthlessness that honestly few could match. Starting as a small-time drug dealer, Williams just refused to play by the rules set by the established powers like the Moran family. He wanted to be the king, and well, he was willing to kill for the crown. Williams's rise was meteoric and violent. After being shot in the stomach by Jason Moran in 1999 over a drug debt, Williams didn't back down. He went to war. He built his own syndicate, a loose-knit crew of loyalists, drug cooks, and most importantly, hitmen. His strategy was simple and brutal: eliminate the competition. He didn't just want to take over their territory, he wanted them dead. He outsourced the violence, paying substantial sums to contract killers to carry out the hits, insulating himself from the trigger pulling. The Williams syndicate revolutionized the drug trade in Melbourne. While the Morans focused on wholesale, Williams targeted the retail market. He flooded the streets with high-quality ecstasy and methamphetamines, undercutting his rivals and rapidly building a multi-million-dollar empire. He was a new breed of gangster, media-savvy, brazen, and utterly contemptuous of the old underworld code. He taunted his rivals and the police through the media, basking in his own notoriety. His campaign of violence against the Moran family became the stuff of legend, a brutal saga that played out on the front pages of newspapers. He was responsible for, or connected to, at least 10 murders in the Gangland War. He methodically dismantled the Moran dynasty, killing Mark, then Jason, then the patriarch Lewis. Each murder was more audacious than the last, a public execution designed to send a clear message. Carl Williams was now in charge. But Williams' reign was destined to be short. His high-profile violent methods made him a #1 target for Victoria Police's Piranha Task Force. The sheer scale of the bloodshed just couldn't be ignored. The police began to slowly dismantle his network, flipping his own hitmen and associates, turning them into witnesses against him. The same men he had paid to kill were now lining up to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. The loyalty he had bought was just as easily sold. In 2007, Carl Williams was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison. His empire, built so quickly on bodies and bravado, collapsed just as fast. From behind bars, he attempted to leverage what he knew, offering to provide evidence against corrupt police and other criminals in exchange for concessions. It was a final, desperate play from a man who had lost everything. It was also a fatal one. On April 19, 2010, inside a high-security unit in Barwon Prison, Carl Williams was bludgeoned to death by a fellow inmate with the stem of an exercise bike. The baby-faced killer who had lived by violence died by it. His story is a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by morality. He reached the top of the criminal world, but his throne was a prison cell, and his reign ended with a brutal, lonely death on a concrete floor. In the gritty, working-class Melbourne suburb of Richmond, one family name became, well, almost legendary for crime, violence, and a very particular brand of terrifying matriarchal control: Pettingill. At the head of this notorious clan was Kath Pettingill, a one-eyed, tough-as-nails mother of 10 who would become known to the public as Granny Evil. While her sons carried out the crimes, it was Kath who really ruled the roost, creating a family environment where criminality wasn't just accepted, it was the family business. The Pettingill boys, honestly, were a pack of violent and unpredictable criminals. Dennis Drac Allen was a prolific drug dealer and, a suspected murderer. Peter Allen was a major heroin trafficker. Trevor Pettingill was a career criminal with a long rap sheet for armed robbery and violence. And then there was Victor Pearce, probably the most infamous of them all. Together, they ran a criminal enterprise from their Richmond homes, dealing drugs, committing armed robberies, and running guns. They were, without a doubt, the terror of their neighborhood. The family's criminality was, brazen and deeply ingrained. Drug deals were done from their front doors, and stolen goods were piled high in their living rooms. Kath, despite her claims of being just a simple mother, was the center of this web. She provided the alibis, hid the evidence, and fiercely defended her sons against any outside threat, especially the police. She lost an eye after a witness she was allegedly trying to intimidate shot her through a closed door, an incident that only hardened her resolve and cemented her fearsome reputation. The Pettingills' notoriety exploded into the national consciousness with one of the most infamous crimes in Australian history, the Walsh Street murders. On October 12, 1988, two young Victoria Police constables, Stephen Tynan and Damien Eyre, were gunned down in a cold-blooded ambush in South Yarra. The police believed it was a revenge attack for the shooting death of career criminal Graham Jensen, a close associate of the Pettingill family, killed by police the day before. The investigation immediately focused on Victor Pearce and 3 associates. The subsequent trial was a media circus. The key evidence came from a protected witness, Jason Ryan, the nephew of 2 of the accused. However, under immense pressure and intimidation, Ryan's evidence crumbled in court. In a stunning result, Victor Pearce and his co-accused were acquitted of the murders, a verdict that outraged the police force and the public. Kath Pettingill celebrated outside the court, defiant as ever. Despite beating the murder charges, the Walsh Street incident really marked the beginning of the end for the Pettingill clan. The intense police scrutiny that followed crippled their criminal operations. One by one, the family imploded. Dennis Allen died of a heart condition, his body ravaged by drug abuse. Victor Pearce, who lived by the gun, eventually died by it, shot dead in his car in Port Melbourne in 2002 as part of the Gangland Wars. Others ended up in prison or faded into obscurity. The story of the Pettingills is honestly a dark chapter of suburban horror. It shows how a single family, under the influence of a powerful and immoral matriarch, can create a dynasty of crime that terrorizes a community and challenges the very fabric of law and order. Granny Evil outlived most of her criminal sons, a lonely and notorious figure whose legacy is one of violence, tragedy, and the destruction of her own family. As the old-school Melbourne godfathers fell, a new power was, quietly rising in the sprawling suburbs of Western Sydney. This was a different kind of organized crime, built on tight-knit family and community loyalties, transplanted from the Middle East, especially Lebanon. For years, families like the Hamzis and the Alameddines operated in relative obscurity, but a series of bloody public feuds has thrust them into the spotlight as the new face of organized crime in Australia. The Alameddin family is a prime example of this new breed. They operate not as a single top-down syndicate, but as a sprawling network of relatives and close associates. Their business is modern-day organized crime, large-scale drug supply, particularly cocaine and meth, firearms trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. They are tech-savvy, using encrypted communication apps like Cypher and Anom to coordinate their activities, believing themselves to be, beyond the reach of law enforcement. What sets these families apart is their extreme clannish loyalty and their propensity for explosive public violence. Disputes are not handled in boardrooms or quiet back alleys. They are settled with automatic weapons in suburban streets. The feud between the Hamzi and Alameddin families has resulted in a string of tit-for-tat executions, car bombings, and drive-by shootings that have terrorized Sydney. For them, honor, respect, and revenge are paramount, often trumping business sense. The structure of these networks makes them incredibly challenging for police. It's not a club you can join. You have to be born into it or marry in. Trust is based on blood, not business contracts. This insular nature means they are notoriously difficult to infiltrate. An outsider is spotted immediately. Information is kept within a very small circle. And the no-snitching code is absolute, enforced by the credible threat of lethal violence against not just the informer, but their entire family. Their operations are both sophisticated and brutal. They have access to military-grade weaponry, and their foot soldiers are often young, disenfranchised men from their communities, lured by the promise of wealth, power, and a sense of belonging. These young recruits are fiercely loyal and willing to commit extreme acts of violence to protect the family name and their patch. It's a generational cycle of crime that is, frankly, incredibly difficult to break. The downfall of the encrypted app Anom, secretly run by the FBI, gave Australian police an unprecedented window into their world. Operation Ironside led to hundreds of arrests, including key members of the Alameddin network. Police seized millions in cash, tons of drugs, and hundreds of weapons. It was a massive blow, revealing the scale and sophistication of their criminal enterprises to a shocked public. Despite these major police successes, the threat remains. For every leader arrested, there are brothers, cousins, and nephews ready to step up and take their place. The deep-rooted cultural and family ties that give these networks their strength also ensure their survival. The Alameddins and other Middle Eastern crime families represent the evolution of organized crime in Australia, a decentralized, tech-reliant, and exceptionally violent force that will continue to challenge law enforcement for years to come. They call themselves 1%ers, the small fraction of motorcyclists who live outside the law. Outlaw motorcycle gangs, or bickies, are one of the most visible and enduring pillars of Australian organised crime. With their leather vests, elaborate patches, and thundering Harley-Davidsons, they project an image of rebellion and brotherhood. But honestly, behind the romanticised facade lies a network of highly disciplined, hierarchical, and violent criminal organisations. Gangs like the Hells Angels, the Comanchero, the Bandidos, and the Finks operate on a national and even international scale. Each club is a chapter in a global franchise of crime. Their structure is paramilitary, with a strict chain of command from the national president down to the chapter, presidents, sergeants-at-arms, and finally, the prospects, nominees desperate to earn their colours or patch. This rigid discipline makes them a formidable force. Their criminal enterprises are vast and varied. They are heavily involved in the importation and distribution of drugs, particularly methamphetamines and steroids. They control security at licensed venues, run extortion rackets, and are involved in gun running and violent debt collection. Their clubhouses, often fortified like military compounds, serve as the nerve centers for their criminal planning and a sanctuary from the outside world. Violence is, without a doubt, fundamental to Biki culture. It's used to enforce internal discipline, to intimidate rivals, and to control territory. Inter-gang rivalries often explode into open warfare. The most infamous example is the 1984 Milpera massacre, a Sunday afternoon shootout between the Comanchero and the Bandidos in a Sydney pub car park that left 7 people dead, including an innocent teenage girl. It was really a brutal wake-up call to the public about the true nature of these gangs. More recently, conflicts have played out in public spaces with frightening regularity. The 2009 brawl at Sydney Airport, where a Hells Angels associate was bludgeoned to death in front of horrified travelers, demonstrated their utter disregard for public safety. These wars are often over control of drug turf, or are sparked by members patching over to a rival gang, an act seen as the ultimate betrayal. Law enforcement agencies across the country have dedicated task forces, like Strike Force Raptor in New South Wales, specifically to disrupt and dismantle Biki gangs. They use a strategy of constant harassment, pulling them over for minor traffic infringements, raiding their clubhouses, and targeting their finances. Anti-consorting laws have also been introduced to prevent convicted criminals from associating with each other, directly striking at the heart of the Biki Brotherhood model. Despite this immense pressure, the gangs persist. The allure of the patch, the sense of brotherhood, and the promise of criminal riches continue to attract new recruits. They adapt, moving their operations online, using sophisticated communication methods, and laundering their money through a complex web of legitimate-looking businesses. The outlaw motorcycle gang is not just a bunch of mates who like to ride bikes. It is a resilient and dangerous form of organized crime that is woven into the very fabric of the Australian underworld. From the silent, patient network of the Ndrangheta to the bloody, short-lived reign of Carl Williams, these families and gangs have left a deep and lasting scar on Australia's criminal history. Their stories are, well, a complex tapestry of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and violence. They have shaped the drug trade, corrupted industries, and brought warfare to our suburban streets. The names Moran, Pettingill, and Alameddine are now etched into the public consciousness, not as builders of society, but as architects of its destruction, their legacies measured in lives lost and communities shattered. But as we've seen, while individual families and their leaders can rise to extraordinary heights of power, their fall is often just as spectacular. The underworld is a constantly shifting landscape. For every boss jailed or killed, a vacuum is created, and there is always someone new, someone more ruthless or more ambitious, waiting in the wings to take their place. Organized crime is not a static entity. It's a constant, evolving force that adapts to police tactics, new technologies, and changing markets. The names and faces may change, but the business of crime remains. If there is one lesson to be drawn from these brutal sagas, it is this: power built on a foundation of crime is always temporary. The throne is never secure. The loyalty is bought, not earned. And the very violence used to gain power is almost always the instrument of its downfall. The consequences of this fleeting power, however, are not so temporary. They ripple through families, communities, and generations. A dark inheritance that can last for decades. The pursuit of the criminal crown is a game where, in the end, nobody truly wins.